Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore positive. We are positively into the bye week here. Ravens got kicked around on Sunday by the Eagles. We're going to talk about that. We're going to celebrate the holidays and eggnog. I'm having my first official spiked eggnog on Wednesday afternoon at Coco's Pub, established in 1985. And still rocking. I mean, just great crab cakes. They ship them there. We're going to be hanging out on Wednesday at Coco's. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. We'll have the Ravens scratch-offs to give away. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care who power Luke up back and forth to Owings Mills. And our 26th anniversary also still very much in progress with oysters and all that brought to you by our friends at Curio Wellness and Foreign Daughter, as well as Liberty Pure Solutions, 1-800 clean water. And my water is very clean. I have well water, and they come here. They have all these chemicals and salts and water's delicious. My skin's nice. Feels nice in the shower. Liberty Pure Solutions. They do a great job for us. Luke is here, and we've talked at length, almost an hour we did, on Justin Tucker and whatever few options, if there are any. I guess there's unlimited options. None of them better than where they are at this point. It's going to be a long week out in Owings Mills in self-scouting, amongst other things, and then just the preparation of, the Giants are just going to roll the ball out at MetLife. Sure they are. Wake me when that game's got 8 minutes left to go and it's a one-score game, right? Because that's the league. And then the short rest, Pittsburgh, and then shorter rest, Christmas in Houston. And just where the confidence level for the team is right now. Luke Jones joins us now. We are going to dive into a lot of this. We talked a little bit about the game and then a lot about Justin Tucker. In a general sense, where they are in the cosmos, where other teams are emerging or failing or flailing. And I don't know that you can even look outside of yourself, Luke, because as you and I have pointed out, and we're not going to sit here and take phone calls 40 hours this week and next week before they play again, like we used to in the old days. And maybe the baseball team will make news and the Terps are playing this, whatever. There's other things going on, including my crab cake tours this week. But out in Owings Mills this week, where things aren't happening, the kicking thing's on fire, the offense isn't as good as it should be, right? Bateman injury, whatever. And the defense has just really underperformed. And I don't know whether, about Marcus Williams, you could talk about Odafe Owe not getting snaps. You could talk about Van Noy being on the bench. You could talk about Clowney not being here anymore, and Patrick Queen and all the departed souls from last year, and Mike McDonald and Anthony Weaver and all of that. They're soul searching at 8-5 right now, right? Like, this is a weird time. It's a weird late bye. It's going to start fast, and they're going to have more football than they know what to do with over 11 days once this thing gets going again next week, and they can't trust their kicker.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have problems they need to figure out. And it speaks to where the standard is for the defense at this point. Look, I'm guilty of this as much as anyone, that how they performed on Sunday. And let's keep in mind, this was a 14-12 game until about 8 minutes to go. So you look at it through that lens, and I'll continue to say, offense, special teams, defense, what was the least of their problems on Sunday? I'd put the defense third, right? I'd put them behind the special teams and the offense in terms of how I'm divvying up the blame, right? But that doesn't mean it was perfect, and that doesn't mean that they don't have their issues. I mean, we've talked about the pass defense for quite a long time, right? All season. And you look at the pass defense, I mean, albeit 2 of the games they've lost, but you look at the fact that, think about what we were talking about in terms of where they were from a touchdown passes allowed standpoint. I mean, they've allowed, I think, 1 touchdown pass in the last 3 games, so they've made progress there. Part of that progress has been benching your $17 million safety, who has one of the highest cap numbers on the team, who was a healthy scratch on Sunday. And we barely batted an eyelash about that because, 1, he hasn't been playing, and 2, he has no presence on special teams. So,
and 3, they own the media, and other than us talking about how much money they wasted on him, and maybe over at the fan, if somebody calls in about it,
asked about a lot, Nestor. I mean,
I don't know that they've been rugged on the Marcus Williams thing as bad. They've just made him disappear.
They benched him. I mean, I'm not sure what else there is to say about it at this point. What do you want me to ask? I'll ask John Harbaugh about him if you want. What do you want to ask now?
Oh, I don't think there's
we've asked
anything
those
to
questions.
ask.
But
I'm
that's my
just
point.
thinking
They've been asked about that. Yeah,
I think in the totality of all of it, if they don't win the Super Bowl, and I'm not going to even assume that they're not going to win the Super Bowl because they can still win the Super Bowl.
of
You
course
know,
they
I mean, I'm
could.
going to sit here
It's
and
the
still say
NFL.
that, right?
League's
So
nuts.
I'm not that guy. But if they don't win the Super Bowl and you evaluate this season, Marcus Williams, we haven't talked enough about him. You know what I mean? And I would also say he's really been a guy unlike Chris Davis who came under, or even Glenn Davis before him, or I'm thinking of people that came under, even Earl Thomas, who brought his own microscope with his off the field antics. But and really was a decorated player. I mean, Earl Thomas came here as Super Bowl champion.
Sure.
He's still talked about as a Hall of Fame possibility, right? Like
Hmm.
he's that kind of caliber of player. Brian McKinney's probably that caliber of player, as well as Matt Burke and a bunch of guys, Anquan Bolden, guys that came in here, and all those guys got paid a lot of money and made impact. Marcus Williams made more money than any of them. And in the big picture, he's going to skate. I don't even know what he looks like. I never spoke to him. I don't think fans knew anything about him, but that's a huge boo-boo on the salary cap,
Sure.
against what this could
Well,
be and what it could have been, and where they're getting incredible value out of the Kyle Hamiltons that we talk so much about. They're good players. We don't talk about the guys they're paying that aren't playing well.
sure. Well, and in fairness, there generally haven't been that many of those guys over the years. But we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I mean, safety's been a position where dipping their toes in the free agency. Okay, Eric Weddle, thumbs up on that one. Tony Jefferson, value wise, no. Earl Thomas, I mean, he got cut because he took a swing at Chuck Clark, in the middle of a practice and had all kinds of issues, even in his one full season with the Ravens. Again, I want to be very clear about this. Marcus Williams was not a value concern the first 2 years because of how he performed or played. The injuries were an issue. He hadn't really been injured in New Orleans. So I don't know how the first 2 years I chalk up more to rotten luck and some unforeseen injuries that just hurt because availability is first and lack of availability hurts no matter who it is. Uh, this year, I I'll be totally honest with you. No one saw Marcus Williams being this bad this year to the point where he is now a healthy scratch, despite having one of the highest cap numbers on the team. So look, they've inserted Ardarius Washington into the lineup for him. He's been better than Marcus Williams. It's a very low bar, albeit. And they have moved Kyle Hamilton to more of a deep safety spot, which, let me be very clear, Kyle Hamilton will make an impact and is good wherever he plays. However, there has been an element to you love having him closer to the line of scrimmage. And when you have a pass rush that isn't as consistent and you can line him up on the edge and rush or have him, blitz or play the slot, help out and run support, all those different things, which he still does some of that. And I'm not saying he's just playing two safety and that's all it is, but he's back there more. There is a hidden cost to that. So it absolutely has zapped upside to their defense, but their pass defense had been so bad that they had to raise the floor, and they've been able to do that the last 3 weeks. Now, how that goes the rest of the year, we're going to see. But
And with Kyle Hamilton having a bad shoulder, keeping him off the line of scrimmage probably isn't a bad idea
yeah,
because he leads with his body. He's a
right.
physical man.
Well, and I assume that play, and they may have even said it on the telecast with the sideline reporter. Of course, I'm in the press box and not listening to the television broadcast during the game. I assume that was a stinger, but because he was in concussion
They
protocol.
said concussion protocol,
But
and when he
stingers are
went
part of
down,
that. Yeah,
yeah, when he went down, it was clear left arm went numb or shot
yeah.
down, and then he apparently I saw this on X or Blue
He
Sky,
spiked
wherever
his
it was,
helmet
spiked his helmet.
with
They didn't
with his
show
other arm.
that.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was ticked off. You could tell he was frustrated in pain. I mean, guy's tough. He doesn't want to leave the game, and he's
Well,
had,
clearly came
unfortunately,
back in 5 minutes later. I'm
right.
like,
He
what the
didn't.
hell happened to him? What shot did
Yeah,
they give him?
I don't think he even gave. I don't think he even gave up. I don't think he missed a snap. Looking at the game book, he didn't miss a snap. So I don't think that's necessarily going to be something that he deals with, indefinitely. I mean, we'll see. Certainly, we know the bye week's a good time for him because he had the ankle a few weeks back. I mean, he's dealt with some things, even going back to training camp. Hamilton's been banged up, but again, going back to the Marcus Williams, Hamilton, the safety position collectively. I mean, Eddie Jackson's gone. They released him. So that has not worked out whatsoever. And, they took on so much water there. They seem to have stabilized that, albeit with some sacrificing of Hamilton playing in the box quite as often as you'd like them to, ideally. But, then, okay, Kyle Van Noy, John Harbaugh said last Friday that he's not dealing with a serious injury, but he missed the game and he was dealt with listed with a neck and a hamstring issue. You got to get him right. Owe to me is really interesting. I mean, that's, we'll see what John Harbaugh has to say about it, but he absolutely played a very low number of snaps. I mean, they had 56 defensive snaps and Owe played 15. And now, could there have been an early game injury that he was kind of playing through? But if you think back to the Barkley touchdown, I think it's 3 plays before that was a 3rd and 7 conversion to Goddard. Go look at Owe going up against Jordan Mailata, the Eagles left tackle. Mailata embarrassed him. I mean, that was an embarrassing rep for Odafe Owe, who has had a pretty good season. I mean, he has a career high in sacks. He's had a solid season. Is he the superstar that people hoped he would become? No, but he's been solid. But I don't know if he was hurt or just because of how run heavy the script was for Philadelphia as the game went on. And they thought, hey, we're going to just put Malik Harrison and Tavius Robinson, guys that set a, more consistent edge than Owe. But him playing so little, coupled with the fact that Van Noy was inactive, begs some questions at the very least.
Well, they probably didn't like him
So
in there against Barkley then, right? I mean, in the
yeah,
general sense.
I mean, like I said, whether it
it
was
felt like
that
they were going to run, and they did. They didn't want to
whether it was
pass.
that or like I said, he may have tweaked a hamstring or an ankle or something like that in the first quarter, and he was just trying to play through it, right? I mean, that happens as well. I mean, Van Noy was a perfect example of that last week. It wasn't like he got hurt and then was out for the game. He was on the field on, the last 2 drives of the game, albeit just a couple plays here and there. So I don't know if it was that or was it a coaching decision? I don't know. So, you look at the defense. I feel better about the defense collectively than I did a month ago. That doesn't mean I necessarily feel great about it across the board. The offense collectively, I still have a reasonably high level of confidence. However, the guard play. I think, and I saw a few people make mention of this as far as some, Ravens Twitter, some pundits or people who are film junkies, Patrick McCary and Daniel Faalele, and we've talked about them. And again, we even gave those guys flowers last week, but this was another example of going up against a really good defensive line. And those guys they're overwhelmed when they go up against the top competition. You got to be able to hold your own. And more often than not, when they face the best of the best defensive lines, those guys have struggled. So, how does that translate to January where you're going up against really good fronts and the best of the best? I mean, not that every playoff team has a great defensive line, but most of them do. Most of them do have good defensive lines at the very least. So
I'm
how's
going to
that
keep
going to
saying
translate?
Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Kansas City, right?
Yeah,
Because
right,
that's who
exactly.
they're going to see. Those
Sure,
are the
sure.
teams. And Buffalo, they matched up really well here.
They did very
Kansas
well that
City
night. Sure.
was a fair fight. Pittsburgh going to see them again. So, like, to think that any one of them on the road that this team could go and win, and Tucker could hit a kick,
Of
and
course
things
they
could go
could.
perfect, and they could have Derrick Henry could run them over all night long, and Zay
But
Flowers
3 in
could
a row?
wow them, and Mark Andrews can go up in the air, and somebody could strip a ball, the peanut strip, and like all of that stuff, right? I have a hard time believing they're going to do that 4 times in a row in January as comprised, because I
Yeah.
don't think they're as good as they are on their best day. You know what I mean? I don't, and again, this is 5 losses in. This is start good, win a couple, beat bad teams, lose to bad teams. They lost 2 bad teams. I mean, lost to the Raiders, lost to the
Sure.
Browns. So like the body of work here, despite the fact that Tony Romo has John Harbaugh going to the Hall of Greatness, and Eric DeCosta's the greatest of this, and Lamar's the greatest of that, the body of this work for all of what this has been this year, as you and I sit here and try to fumigate through it now, not and maybe we're at Flacco planking right now, and
Maybe.
maybe there is a parade. Maybe there is. But this bye week and this period of time for you and I to talk about problems all over the field, right? I mean, their offense can be great, but to your point, their offensive line's not great. Certain weeks it can be functional. It can,
Some weeks
and
it's good even, right? I mean, it's been very good at times, but it's inconsistent. And when you go up against those tougher fronts, to your point, what Pittsburgh throws at you, what Kansas City can throw at you with Chris Jones, even though low key the Chiefs defense has actually taken a step back here recently. I don't want to dwell
nobody's
too much.
talking about the Chiefs right now. They're
Yeah,
they're only the third best team. It's all Eagles and Lions and
and the
Lions and
Bills
yeah,
and
the
yeah.
Chiefs. They've only lost once, but they're
Oh, sure.
suspect. But they're
Well,
suspect. Yeah, sure
they
they
are,
are.
but they were suspect last year, and then
They
we
don't
saw what
have to
happened
win
in
the Super
January.
Bowl in December.
Sure. No, and
They
look,
have to win home field advantage in December.
that's
What they need to
also
do.
the lesson for the Ravens here, and that's where, you know, all is not lost. I still think this is a good football team. I do. But where I am concerned, and this is what I'm working on right now at BaltimorePositive.com, and we spent a whole segment talking about Justin Tucker, but Justin Tucker, and I do look at the interior of the offensive line. Not Linderbaum. No, Linderbaum's really good. He's one of the best centers in the league. But McCary with the penalties, even though that wasn't the issue as much on Sunday, that has been an issue. Even when he's played well, the penalties, those hurt. That's really hurt their offensive operation at times. Are these penalties?
It's cost
And
them
Fa
possession. Period.
and Falele just, he's not consistent enough. Where I look at this and say, are you going to be able to do it 3 times in a row on the potentially all three on the road the way it's shaping up right now, just to get to the Super Bowl? Let, let's look at the Ravens through the lens of get to the Super Bowl, and then you worry about whatever the matchup is, whether it's a rematch with the Eagles or whatever. But to do that, are you going to have enough consistency out of your offensive line? So I kind of look at those as the two big ones right now, and that's fully acknowledging this isn't an elite defense. There are still things about the defense that I have concerns about, even if it's looked better the last 3 weeks or so. But I look at those two problems specifically, Justin Tucker and their interior offensive line, and where my worry is, what's the fix there? In Justin Tucker's case, you hope that something clicks in, or there's some kind of revelatory moment for him where he just says, "Hey, I'm Justin Tucker. What's going on here?" And then he's fine moving forward. But with the offensive line, do you revisit Voorhees? Do you revisit Ben Cleveland? Do you keep going with these guys and just hope that they continue to get better, more consistent? I don't know, but those are pretty important factors, and this is why, and this is where I'll go back. And I'm not look. This isn't to say who was right, who was wrong, any of this, because Derrick Henry's had a great year, right? Great year. But one of the things that we talked about at the time, for the Ravens to spend that money on a running back, whether it's Derrick Henry or whoever you would have brought in, we did talk about the fact that they let Kevin Zeitler go, and Kevin Zeitler was not going to command a 4-year extension or anything like that. I mean, look at what he ended up signing with the Lions. I'm guessing, all things being equal, the Ravens could have gotten him for something comparable to that.
Six
They
and a
elect.
half million, maybe. What was that number?
I mean, I think there are incentives built in there. I mean, I can
Yeah,
look at it
but
here
it
in a
but it
moment.
was in that range of not. It wasn't a $10 million deal. Yes,
But
that
the,
was more
right,
Derrick Henry's deal. Yeah.
yeah, but the point with that was they decided to go so young with their offensive line. And look, the Ronnie Stanley bounce back year did happen. Ronnie Stanley, he's not an all pro left tackle. Let's be clear about that. He's not that guy anymore, but he's been markedly better than he was a year ago, and more available, and certainly someone that you can depend on and say is on that offensive line. But when you go with two brand new guards and a rookie right tackle, and look, I still think Rosengarten's going to end up being a good player, but he's a rookie and he has his ups and downs. But uh, that's where I look at that, and the conversation, the talking point back in March was, you could see moving on from Zeitler or Morgan Moses, but they moved on from both. And then, I mean, I was less moved about John Simpson. John Simpson was a below average starter. He was fine for the Ravens last year, but
But that's what
but
Falele is right now.
right, and that but with McCary, if he cut out the penalties, you'd feel better about it. And at times, those guys, I want to be clear,
They didn't
it
want
hasn't been
McCary to
all
start
bad,
though. McCary's a
right?
backup plan.
He's been their sixth man, right? I mean, that they started the year like that, right? I mean, okay, they had McCary playing right tackle to start the year.
But
They
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 could
wanted,
say at the beginning, if we had Voorhees, we won't need McCary, and that'll be good. But if McCary plays, that's not a great thing. That's not plan. So they're already not planning on plan
yeah,
A, right? I mean, just
yeah.
the fact that he has been their starter is not something that you and I thought to be a good idea all of the offseason. And we didn't talk about anything but the offensive line most of the offseason, really.
Sure. I mean, we talked about McCary as being the backup plan, and again, it's not he hasn't been horrendous, or any Falele hasn't been horrendous, when you look at it in its totality, but it's been up and down. And in some of these games where you're going up against teams that have defensive lines that can bully you a little bit more, that's where it's been lacking, and that's where it's hurt their operation. And you look at some of these plays. I mean, look, we talked about this. I don't think Lamar Jackson played a very good game on Sunday. He wasn't awful by any means, but he wasn't very good. But go look at some of these plays, and sometimes you wonder, why does he take the deep drop that he does? Go look at how the interior offensive line's getting pushed back. I mean, it's not ideal. And just for what it's worth, and again, Pro Football Focus is not the end all be all. Kevin Zeitler right now, third in their grading among qualified guards. And his deal with Detroit was, let me look at it, a 1 year, $6 million contract. So look, it's not, this isn't second guessing because people were questioning it at the time. It was always a lot of change at once for the offensive line. It's held together pretty well for stretches, but when you go up against the best of the best, which again, this is all about January, right? This isn't about having the highest ranked offense or the best team in DVOA or MVPs or Pro Bowls, or it's about January, and you're going up against the best of the best in January, and two of the last 3 weeks. Now, granted, hey, they did the job against the Chargers, and the Chargers are going to be in the playoffs, right? So I don't want to discredit when they win, but two of the last 3 weeks, we've kind of seen them go up against tough fronts, and the offensive line hasn't been up to the task. And that's where you look at the operation across the board and say, you look at it. Am I expecting changes there on the bye week? Probably not, because we haven't seen them to this point. They've told you how they feel about Voorhees and Ben Cleveland to this point in the season, right? They've told you for 3 years how they feel about Ben Cleveland. So I don't think that's changing now. But I look at the incumbents, and that's where I have concern. Again,
Well,
going
they have
back
no
to
problem making changes. Look at that. We just talked about the safety position. They had no
sure,
problem. Marcus Williams, Eddie Jackson's not getting, it's not happening. We'll take the little guy and play him because he's going to get out there and be where he's supposed to be
right,
and make plays.
and
And so they're not, whatever their feelings are for Justin Tucker or whatever their feelings are in a general sense about these players, they moved on from Zeitler, and you and I didn't love that. I mean, I think
yeah,
as we sat here in the offseason last year, we thought he's still an is, not a might be. And I would say this even about Morgan Moses as being a guy that showed up and was going to play 15, 16 games and leave McCary on the bench, not make McCary a bright light 60 snap starter over a dozen weeks in a row, that we would have said this would not be their best look if this were the case. This was not ideal. This is not the way it was drawn up. And you and I, we don't disagree with DaCosta all that often. But I think we would have been much more comfortable. We would have talked less about the offensive line in the offseason if they would have
yeah,
signed Zeitler.
right. And again, this was what my argument for not being over the moon about the Derrick Henry signing. This is what it was based on. It wasn't that I love Derrick Henry. I love watching Derrick Henry. He's had a great year. He
You're saying
has.
they traded Henry for Zeitler and Moses, and
I mean, that's a
decided to play
simplistic way
young.
of looking at it, but there's
Yeah.
whatever precious cap dollars you have, or whatever you're willing to do with your cap, is always going to come at the expense of something else, right? And look, I'm not saying definitively that they were wrong here. Derrick Henry's second in the league in rushing. I'm not going to sit here and try to like complain about that, but it was always grounded in, you're doing that. So what is that going to mean for your offensive line? And look, Balele's had his moments. McCary, I mean, you made reference to, well, they bench Marcus Williams is awful. I mean, these guys haven't been awful. These guys haven't been horrendous. But in
From a
these,
penalty standpoint, they have been.
well, across the board, they've been bad with penalties. I mean, all three phases have been guilty of that. But but when they've had these elite matchups against really tough fronts, that's where it's struggled. It's been a factor. And again, how much of that is their protection? How much of that is Lamar needing to get the ball out quicker? Or in some cases, as his mom pointed out to him after the game, times where you need to just tuck it and run and not, as much as we have talked about this evolution of Lamar Jackson playing from the
He
pocket,
does not look to get out of the pocket and run as much. He doesn't.
yeah. Well, but
He's got his eyes down the
hey, there
field. I mean,
but there were
he's not
lots of people,
Houdini, although we think he is. He
lots
can't
of
move out of the pocket and keep his eyes down the
right.
field and navigate trouble.
And let's also remember, and this is where I'll stick up for Lamar on that front, those plays where, like he did against Hubbard, like he has done, where you see him running around for 15 seconds. For every play like that, there are some ones where he's going to end up taking a 15-yard loss on a sack or get called for grounding because he tries to dirt the ball way too late. Or so in that way, it's like Barry Sanders, right? Barry Sanders, one of the all-time great running backs, but also go look at the all-time leaders in terms of runs for negative yardage. Barry Sanders is right up there, right? In the way you think about a home run hitter who strikes out a lot. There's always the flip side to that.
I
So
remember the press conference with Brian Billick over at the Mexican restaurant where he made the case that Scott Mitchell operated in 2nd and 12 and 14 and 16 because sometimes Barry Sanders went backwards.
sure. So you have some of that. So look, it's not to isolate one specific problem. It's all of those things together. So, but I go back to interior offensive line, Justin Tucker. Again, we don't need to we spend a 45-minute conversation on that, and we still don't know what they should really do, right? I mean, they don't have the conviction as far as how to
Well, you
solve
were
that
at
problem.
his locker. I didn't ask you about that in that segment. You were in the locker room, and you're one guy. We used to have two or three guys in there. We used to get different ends of the locker room. I saw some talk. The one thing I will say, and this is my memo to Chad Steele this week, is now I'm just a fan at home, and the press conferences that come from the room, when I hear Chad Steele come in and say, we're going to do Lamar in the locker room, what that basically means is a middle finger to the fans that have tuned in 20 minutes after the game to do the post-game thing, that they're not going to bring Lamar into that circumstance. Tucker, obviously. So the podium is now, and imagine this, and I'll say this out loud, not for your benefit or for anyone's, but it's a coward space, the press conference, like throwing people like me out, and now they don't even bring them into the press conferences to do what for 30 years has been post game for me, which is hearing what lies they want to say, which way John's eyes move, an injury report, some emotion, how it's handled and all of that. So I don't know, but how was the locker room? I haven't asked you that on the air or off the air. How was the locker room after? Because it was a bad loss going into a
Yeah.
bye, and the kicker and the Philadelphia thing and the Vic Fangio thing that I know plays bigger behind closed doors than fans care or think to know, but I know it's a big deal. I know there's really bad blood there. And just Philadelphia came in and took their lunch money in front of 20,000 screaming Eagles fans. I mean, I don't know if my wife and I were down there waiting in traffic. It was 30 degrees out and they lost, and fans are in the car waiting, like doing post game and like all of that stuff. It's a pretty bad loss. I mean, a fifth loss at this time of the year with a team that's supposed to go to the Super Bowl. I mean, I think that probably was a bad room. I would hope, I would think.
Well, I mean, it was certainly disappointing. I mean, bad loss. I mean, Philadelphia is really good. So I don't want to put it in the bad loss that you'd say about the Cleveland game or the Las Vegas game, right? So, semantics though. But to answer your question, I mean, Harbaugh didn't take the podium until about 25 minutes after the game ended.
I
So
sat here forever. I did
that's a
dishes
problem.
waiting. Yeah.
That's part of the problem because, and look, if PR hears this, they might not like to, guys can leave, right? I mean, unless you're heading into the
It's an
locker room, but
invitation for them to leave. And
and
and the
so
same gaslighting they gave me about taking my career away is the same gaslighting they'll give all the time because
so
they lie pretty, like all of it is orchestrated and it's all orchestrated by John Harbaugh. So as much as I'll give Chad Steele credit or blame, John runs the operation, as has been told to our faces by people who have worked for John for 15 years. So I would just
so
say the 25 minutes, all of it from my sniffer, from you being up in the little house, Kevin Byrne press box up in the corner, and me watching it on TV and waiting for it on the internet. And it always comes to Facebook before it goes to their site. This week it didn't. I'm hanging on. It never came to Facebook. So,
hmm,
like, literally, I'm out here as a fan who owns a radio station who builds a business around this and makes a career around it, for better or worse. And I don't know what their operation is. They got their fifis hurt. They got their ass kicked. Their kicker is in disarray, and the coach is taking 25 minutes to come into the press conference, and they call off the dogs on the rest of it. So I'm just
yeah,
that's what
sure.
happened.
Well,
That's
and
all of
here's
that's true, and all of that is orchestrated so that they could hocus pocus this in Trumpian fashion to make it all fumigate in some way. That's why I think the Marcus Williams thing, like, it's amazing that if this were New York, Philadelphia, or like a place where a guy making that much dough would just disappear and it would be okay. They win a lot of games here. So I mean they have that going for them, but this is a bad loss. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I felt all of it was just a not bad in that they lost to the Browns. I mean, I'll
I
give
think
you that.
deflating. I think deflating.
This is a
Because you're
real measurement of whether we can win a championship or not. You right?
well, look, I mean, Kansas City lost to the Bills a couple weeks ago, right? I mean, if two good teams play, someone has to lose, right?
Bills
So,
got their
but
ass kicked and they picked themselves up nicely.
right, so it's deflating, and but it's not season ending. I think it's disappointing. But to finish up the conversation about that, they ended up actually bringing Lamar back into the interview room because honestly, from a media standpoint, we asked like, look, what a post game locker room is like in terms of number of reporters, number of photogs there, cameras, all of that. To
Which is
try
why
to
they don't have
have
room for me.
to
So yeah.
try to have 40 people gather around Lamar Jackson in a locker room setting
It's
is
absurd.
absolutely impractical. So we asked, to their credit, brought him back in. Now, I don't know what the delay was about. Was he getting treatment? Did he just not want to talk? I don't know. Again, but as far as the locker room, you can imagine when the head coach doesn't take the lectern, the podium until 25 minutes after the game ends. It was pretty cleaned out. Roquan Smith talked, Marlon Humphrey talked. There were a few players here and there that I did not get a chance to because I can only be in one place at one time. Um, you know, Tucker talked. That was very early, and then so he talked, but a lot of guys didn't talk, and you know, it, it's a disappointing loss. It's no question about it. But yeah, they brought him
Everybody's
back
a
in,
hell of a
but
winner, as I've written in both my books. Everybody's a hell of a winner.
every
I
yeah,
learn about men. I learn about athletes. I learn about leadership when they lose. And I really learned the most about all of them when they threw me out 3 years ago. Like, just the fact that I'm not allowed to be in there because I've been discredited by Chad Steele. It's disgraceful. And it's disgraceful that it takes 25 minutes. It's disgraceful that I'm sitting here watching this on TV. It's disgraceful that they moved all of you up into the little box. It's disgraceful that Kevin Burns should want his name on a press box in a place where I'm not invited and I'm legitimate as anybody, as legitimate as you are, or as anybody is. And then I witness how they're managing their loss and fatigue from what standpoint? Because they're getting crushed across drunk people on social media at 8 o'clock at night. Like, I see what people really write. I see what people write on their own threads on Facebook, and I'm like, oh my God, they would ban me if I wrote any. But again, the fan base and the fervor and the conversation on the streets, they're always trying to manage that, quell that. And if they had a grown up like they did in Kevin Byrne a long time, there would be more of an organizational message other than sneak out the back door. I got you covered. Sneak out the back door. The media doesn't matter. The fans don't matter. Nobody matters. Luke, nobody matters. Like, that's the message. And I see that when they lose. And it's What's most disappointing to me, honestly, about all of this isn't even my own treatment because I could be dead in the ditch at this point. The disappointing part for me is seeing 25,000 Eagles fans come in and kind of take the stadium over, and our fans selling off all the tickets and making money, and God bless them. And Lord knows I lost enough money on PSLs and stuff. But I feel like the place being Philly South also sort of played into it just not being a good day. And I'll say this, if I'm writing Purple Rain 3 or if you are, and they win the Super Bowl and beat the Eagles, and you and I vision that out last week, and I think even some fans thought these are two good teams. I wrote about this in my columnist. If they meet in the Super Bowl, I won't be shocked. I mean, I'll be a little shocked because I mean the Ravens have done some really amazing things if they get back there. I mean, they're going to have to navigate this road and do all the things that we're talking about as they're hanging their head a little bit here over 2 weeks, trying to figure out kicking, trying to figure out offensive line, trying to figure out schedule, all of that, and how to win on the road. But I just found it to be really deflating. And I going into this bye, and this is where, as a reporter, you would have been in the John room. That 25 minutes, I would have been at the door in the locker room sniffing that out. You know that's true because that's the way I always worked. It's just the way I've worked since I've owned this business. That this is they've done the fans a discredit by all of this, the way they've handled it, but it's also got my radar up as a locked out guy to say all the money on the bench with Marcus Williams, getting rid of Eddie Jackson, Tucker's hanging head, offensive line's not good enough. They've tried this thing with McCary and Falele, and it's probably not good enough to go win 3 games in a row next month. And I would think that um, this is a tough 2 weeks for them. And I don't say unprecedented, but given
No.
Super Bowl or bust, where you have them, the fact that Jim Nance and Tony Ray, they played the AFC Championship game here, they lost it. When they come back from their set and they're showing how pretty the stadium is, I just thought this is a moment of truth. And it might be a moment of truth for John's future, too, to some degree, because if somehow they hiccup and they lose to the Steelers and they find themselves having to play to sort of even get in somehow, like that 5 losses right now to me, it it hasn't been a great season, and it could have been, and it should have been, and it feels like, and they have Roquan and they have good players. Ronnie Stanley came back to life. Derrick Henry's been all that in a bag of donuts. The fact that they're 8-5 is really not good. That's my ramble for the week because you and I won't get after it, but it's all of it was disappointing. The fans in the stadium, just all of it is disappointing to me to see where they are, having to really have to fight uphill to write Purple Rain 3 in the next 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, look, they have to fight uphill from the standpoint of they're not going to be the number one seed or the number two seed. I agree with that, but they've also had some years where 13 games into the season, they're 7-6 or 6-7. I mean, they've had years like that too, where they're just barely trying to get in, by the skin of their teeth. So it's not quite that. And as we talked about, you look at the landscape of the wild card picture in the AFC. I really don't have. I mean, if we're talking about them having being in a position to potentially not make it, then that's a different that's a different kind of.
It means Anthony Richardson found the fountain of goodness, or so.
Right.
I don't. And to your point, nobody's coming and catching them, so they have that working in their
right.
advantage.
So
right.
So you look at it through that lens, and it's just like, how can you get better? And everything you talked about in terms of the post game and all of that. I hear you. I don't even disagree. Fans selling tickets. That's still noise as it pertains to what they have to do as a football team to improve in the ways they need to improve and find a higher level of consistency. And to your point, when you talk about what's happened with Marcus Williams and go back to when he was benched in Cleveland, which that definitely smelled much more of it there being a disciplinary element in there somewhere.
Yeah, it felt
right?
like there's years later
there was more to it than just like, oh, he's playing that poorly, let's bench
I don't know
him.
when
because,
you learned
he
that
played.
Earl Thomas threw a punch at Chuck Clark. I mean,
Well, and
I may have learned that 5 minutes ago. Literally, I didn't. In my mind, I don't. That wasn't
no,
like
that
a front page incident.
that was what happened. No, that was out there at the time. I mean, if I'm sure you just forgot, but that was common knowledge at that point in time. Because reporters, we were there, and we I didn't see it happen with my own eyes, but other reporters saw it happen with their own eyes. So, but when you're trying to figure this out, what's going on behind the scenes? Are guys pointing the finger? Are guys trying to cover their own butts? Those are the kind of things that tend to happen. Players and coaches, mind you. And let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that that's happening. I'm saying I'm speaking in generalities here. When you're going through adversity, how are you going to handle it? Do you have guys right now that are moaning and groaning and complaining about Justin Tucker getting a free pass because he's been awful all year and is still the kicker? you know, I don't get that sense, but that doesn't mean that behind closed doors that there isn't some of that going on, or there's the potential for that to happen. Uh, you know, the defense, the issues they had that have been mitigated some here recently, but issues giving up big plays in the passing game. How much finger pointing was going on there. I'm fascinated to hear what John Harbaugh is going to have to say about Deontay Johnson not playing. Even after Bateman went out, we talked about this. Like, this isn't a guy that is 5 years removed from his last good season. Go look at the numbers he put up last year. I mean, I think he was still a 900-yard receiver last year, I believe. He's somewhere in that neighborhood. So, I'm wondering about that. I'm wondering about other guys who have had their playing time cut, which, not suggesting like that these are disciplinary things, but like, hey, Trenton Simpson's not playing as much. To me, they've made a judgment that they think Chris Board is giving them something that Trenton Simpson's not giving them as consistently. And, look at some other guys. So they've made some changes. And my goodness, with the way the defense had played, by all means, if you feel some changes are warranted, do it. That's competition. It's a results driven business, as we talked
Well,
about
we
over and
screamed
over.
for them to get better when they were getting
Yeah,
beat, right?
right. So but you look at all these things going on, and I'm sorry, I said for Deontay Johnson, two, 2022 he had 882 yards. Year before that, or last year, he was a little more injured, but still had 700 receiving yards last year. He's not like this isn't a 35-year-old Deshaun Jackson or Des Bryant when they brought him in 4 years
Or
ago.
Brandon Stokely, or
Yeah. So again, not to belabor the point, I just wanted to correct myself on it. But
just
you know,
look at
you
the
look
list.
at you just look at some of these behind the scene questions at the very least, and it's like, how are you attacking this? How are you addressing these things? I think I'm sure there was some of that going on the coaching side. Especially earlier in the year when they bring in Dean Pease, and it's like, okay, where's Dean going to fit here? Not just with helping out Zach Orr, but is he helping out coaching the linebackers, or he's a guy who coached linebackers even in Baltimore before he became the coordinator. What are his thoughts on how the secondary is being coached right now? So there's all of that going on. So I think when you have a team that's 8-5, which is good position, but not the position they wanted to be in, obviously, right? I think it's imperative when you go into the bye week that everyone leaves their ego at the door and you say, how can we get better? How can we attack this? Whether we're talking about special teams, which have been a mess, and not just Tucker, but other elements, Tylan Wallace and penalties and, the return game, all the different things you want to point to. How can you, in the way that they've attacked their pass defense, which they seem to do after that Bengals game where they had the mini bye, the second Bengals game, the Thursday night game. Since then, they've benched Marcus Williams, and their pass defense has been cleaner. It's not perfect. I don't think it's going to be perfect, but it's been better. But how do you attack some of these issues that you have, and how are you doing it in terms of ego and all of that? If you have guys that are still all pulling the rope in the same direction, you can improve some of these areas, right? The offensive line at guard, I don't know. I mean, you're not bringing Kevin Zeitler's not walking through that door in week 16,
Well,
right?
in the Voorhees Cleveland thing, that ship has sailed to this degree where,
Yeah,
like, they want continuity. Like, they don't
right.
want to break continuity. And if you're going to, this would be the week to do it.
Sure.
Like,
And
right?
and and look, hey, there's precedent. Bryant McKinney sat on the bench until the end of the regular season, and they put him in the lineup, and the rest is history. And right, for as much as we talk about Joe Flacco and Anquan Bolden and Jacoby Jones with the Mile High Miracle, go look at how that offensive line, revamped as it was, go look at how they played in January. Joe Flacco be the first to tell you that was a big reason why they were able to do what they did making that run. So I'm not saying that that's impossible. I'm not predicting that right now, though, because Voorhees and Ben Cleveland are not Bryant McKinney, who played really well for them the year before and had a track record of playing at a high level in Minnesota when his head was screwed on right and he was healthy and all that. So, I'm not predicting that, but I think when you're 8-5 and you feel that you can be better than that and you feel like you're still a Super Bowl caliber team from a talent standpoint, and I think they still are, like, I'm not going to, and you said it too, I'm not going to sit here and say they can't win a Super Bowl. For one thing, they're really healthy overall, right? I mean, they're as healthy as you could reasonably ask to be at this stage of a season, especially when you haven't had a bye week. So they have that going for them. But can they make some tweaks, whether it's just subtle that the average fan or reporter is not going to necessarily see, or is it more drastic in terms of some personnel changes like they did at safety a couple weeks ago? But, they clearly have some things they need to tighten up here. And I'll say this, and this will be my final point, and we've talked about this a lot, and this even goes back the last couple years. To be a championship team, yes, you need a great quarterback, and you've got to have great players on both sides of the ball. We all know that. But you also need to be really good in the margins. Kansas City right now, just, humor me here for a moment. They don't look dominant whatsoever on a week by week basis if you actually are watching them play. Whether it's needing a block kick to stave off an upset from Denver or barely beating Carolina or, whatever that was against the Raiders on Black
Just win,
Friday.
baby.
But one thing I will say that they do really well, they're really good in the margins. They don't beat themselves. The Ravens beat themselves a lot. Even games where they win, they do things like the penalties where you just say, my gosh, they just hurt themselves so many different times. They've got to figure out a way to be better in the margins, because those margins, we think of margins, yeah, they're small. Those small margins are really big in January. And if you're going to go on the road, especially, and have to win 3 games to get to a Super Bowl, they absolutely have to find a way to be better in the margins in every phase of the game. And, they're chasing that. And there's going to be a lot of chasing of that over this bye week for this coaching staff. I'm certain of that. Whether they come up with solutions or not with some of those issues, time will tell.
Dark days in Birdland here. Speaking of that, the Orioles also could be making some moves. Luke and I will talk some baseball before the week is over. We have a busy bye week here. We're doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour a couple of times. Going to be at Coco's. I'm wearing my Coco shirt. Can't wait to get some Coco shrimp going, as well as a bowl of cream of crab soup because it's cold as hell. We're going to be there on Wednesday, 1 to 4. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I have Raven scratch-offs to give away. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care putting us out on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour again on Thursday. We're going to be over at Gertrude's. He has so many cool things on his menu that I don't know what I'm going to get, but I love going over to the BMA. John Shields is actually my cousin. He's cousins with my daughter-in-law. So Shields is the maiden name. So by the way, that's 1 to 4. Come on over. The BMA is free to come in. If you love art, think you love art, have never been to a museum, it's sitting there. It's fantastic. It's awesome. And they got a great gift shop, too, and a great restaurant called Gertrude's that will be broadcasting with Dan Rodricks on Thursday. Next week, we're going to be at Faithley's on Wednesday, and then 2 weeks from now, once at Amici's. They don't have a crab cake there, but I'm going to pretend they do. And I might bring Nancy Longo over from Pierpoint to make me a crab cake. But it'd be great to be down in Little Italy for the holidays as well. That's on Tuesday the 17th. Wednesday the 18th, we're wrapping the crab cake tour for the year. We're doing that at Costas in Dundalk. And by the way, Cup of Super Bowl is now underway for Super Bowl week. And I'm working on Cooper's North for that week. We're working on State Fair for that week and getting back to some of our great locations around the area. And shipping crab cakes, big business for all of our places that ship. So keep that in mind on the back end of what was a great Thanksgiving weekend of everything until the Ravens played late on Sunday afternoon. Luke can be found at Baltimore Luke. He is Luke at WNST.net. I can be found anywhere the internet travels, including Blue Sky. I created an account there because of the fascists that are running X and Twitter, which I will address at some point through the holidays. But I've been busy working on Music Classic, working on a whole bunch of really cool stuff around here, including a bunch of Maryland Crab Cake tours for bye week. It's not a bye around here. We got plenty of things to talk about, including a bit of a scuffling Ravens team right now. We dove into Justin Tucker at length. If you want to check that out, all of that's at Baltimore Positive, as well as in our podcast audio vault. I am Nestor. He is Luke. Don't move too far. The Giants game's right around the corner. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore Positive.